My name is Cassidy, and I am 31 years old, working as a cardiologist at one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country. After a decade of silence, my phone rang with a call I never expected to receive. My parents needed something from me, the son they had once deemed unworthy of financial support. The irony was not lost on me. Before I get into my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and be sure to like and subscribe to hear more stories of triumph over family betrayal. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Boston, I never would have imagined the path my life would take. Our family seemed normal on the surface. My father, Richard, worked as a finance manager at a mid-sized company. My mother, Karen, was an elementary school teacher, and my sister, Heather, was 5 years younger than me. We lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom house with a small backyard where Dad would occasionally grill on weekends while Mom tended to her flower garden. From the outside, we probably looked like the typical American family. As a child, I was always drawn to science and medicine. I remember being 7 years old when I got a children's doctor kit for Christmas and would go around the house with my plastic stethoscope, listening to everyone's heartbeats. By the time I was in middle school, I was borrowing medical books from the library, fascinated by how the human body worked. My parents seemed pleased with my academic interests, at least at first. Heather, on the other hand, was different from me in almost every way. Where I was studious and serious, she was social and carefree. She struggled in school, but excelled at making friends and charming adults. I noticed early on how my parents would rush to help her with homework or school projects, spending hours at the kitchen table with her while telling me to figure things out on my own because I was smart enough. The first clear memory I have of feeling the difference in treatment was on my 12th birthday. I had been hoping for a telescope I had pointed out months earlier at the Science Museum gift shop. It cost $150, which seemed like a fortune to me then. Instead, I received a basic chemistry set that cost maybe $30. I tried to hide my disappointment, telling myself it was still a thoughtful gift related to my interests. Just 3 months later, when Heather turned 7, my parents threw her an elaborate princess-themed party with a hired entertainer, custom cake, and presented her with a pink electric mini car that cost nearly $500. When I quietly asked Mom later why Heather's birthday seemed so much bigger than mine, she simply said, "Your sister needs more encouragement. You're already motivated without fancy things." As we grew older, the pattern only became more pronounced. When I made the honor roll, it was expected. When Heather managed to get B's instead of C's, it was celebrated with dinner at her favorite restaurant. When I won the regional science fair in 10th grade, my father merely nodded and said, "Good job." When Heather was cast as a background dancer in the school play, my parents attended every performance with flowers and took dozens of photos. Despite this, I didn't harbor resentment toward my sister. Heather was sweet in her own way, if somewhat spoiled. She would sometimes sneak into my room to show me things she had bought or received, almost as if seeking my approval rather than our parents'. There was one night when she was 13 and I was 18, just months before I would graduate high school, when she confessed to me, "Mom and Dad think I'm the special one, but everyone knows you're the one who's actually going to do something important." I hugged her then, feeling a moment of connection amid the inequity. Throughout high school, I poured myself into academics, determined to earn scholarships for college. My dream was Harvard Medical School, but I knew the path there would be challenging and expensive. I maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA, took every advanced placement course available, volunteered at the local hospital on weekends, and joined science competitions. I was building not just a resume, but what I thought was a solid case for my parents' support. During my junior year, I broached the subject of college with my parents over dinner. "I've been researching pre-med programs," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Harvard has one of the best, but even with scholarships, there will be expenses." My father looked up from his plate. "That's ambitious. You know we've been putting some money aside for college for both you kids, but it's not an unlimited fund." That gave me hope. They had been saving something. I felt relief wash over me, believing that when the time came, they would help as much as they could. I redoubled my efforts in school, certain that if I showed them how serious and capable I was, they would invest in my future. By senior year, college conversations became more frequent. I noticed my parents seemed uncomfortable whenever I mentioned costs or brought up forms for financial aid that required their information. Still, I pushed those concerns aside, focusing instead on application essays and interviews. When acceptance letters started arriving in spring, including one from Harvard with a partial scholarship, I was ecstatic. The partial scholarship would cover about 40% of the total cost, which was better than nothing, but still left a substantial amount to be paid. I remember rushing home that day, letter in hand, heart pounding with excitement and anxiety. This was it. This was the moment when all my hard work would pay off, when my parents would see that I was worthy of their investment. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw both of their cars were home. Perfect. We could talk right away. What I didn't know was that this conversation would change everything. It would be the first crack in what would eventually become an unbridgeable chasm between me and the people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. I walked into the house, clutching my Harvard acceptance letter, filled with a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. My parents were sitting in the living room watching television, and I stood in front of them, barely able to contain my excitement. "I got in," I said, holding up the envelope. "Harvard accepted me with a partial scholarship." My mother smiled tightly. "That's wonderful, honey. We knew you could do it." My father nodded, but didn't meet my eyes. "Good job, son." Their lukewarm response confused me, but I pressed on, sitting down across from them. "So, we should talk about finances. The scholarship covers about 40%, but there's still tuition, housing, books, and other expenses to figure out." A heavy silence fell over the room. My parents exchanged glances before my father cleared his throat. "Cassidy, we need to have an honest conversation," he began, his voice formal, as if he were speaking to one of his employees, rather than his son. "Your mother and I have discussed this extensively, and we've decided that we won't be able to provide financial support for your college education." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at them, certain I had misheard. "What do you mean? I thought you were saving for our college funds?" "We have been saving," my mother interjected, "but we've had to reassess our financial priorities. You're a smart boy, Cassidy. You've already gotten a scholarship, and you're capable of working and taking out loans like many other students do." "But what about the college fund you mentioned?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "Where did that money go?" My father shifted uncomfortably. "We're setting it aside for Heather's future. She doesn't have your academic abilities, so she'll need more support. And to be honest," my mother added, her tone suggesting she was doing me a favor by sharing this wisdom, "this will be good for you. You're a young man, and young men need to learn independence and self-reliance. This will make you stronger." I sat there, trying to process what I was hearing. The partial scholarship would barely make a dent in the total cost of attending Harvard. Without their help, I was looking at potentially over $100,000 in student loan debt, plus the need to work nearly full-time while carrying a pre-med course load. "So, you're saying you have money saved?" I said slowly, "but you're choosing not to use it for my education because I'm a boy?" My father's face hardened. "Don't twist our words. We're making the best decision for the whole family. You've always been independent and capable. Heather needs more support." That's just the reality. I remember looking at these two people, my parents, and suddenly feeling like I was seeing strangers. These weren't the people who had cheered at my Little League games or helped me build science projects in elementary school. These were people who had made a calculation about which child was worth investing in, and I had lost that equation. I left the house that day in a daze, driving aimlessly around town as tears blurred my vision. I pulled over at a park where I used to play as a kid and sat on a bench for hours, watching families and trying to understand what had just happened. I felt betrayed, abandoned, and suddenly very alone. But as the initial shock began to wear off, something else took its place. Determination. If my parents wouldn't help me, I would find another way. I would not give up on my dream, because they had given up on me. The next day, I went to my high school guidance counselor and explained my situation. She helped me apply for additional scholarships and grants, though most deadlines had already passed. She also connected me with the financial aid office at Harvard, who outlined my options for federal and private student loans. Within a week, I had secured a part-time job as a laboratory assistant at a local medical center. It didn't pay much, but it was related to my field and offered flexible hours. I also found weekend work at a grocery store and signed up to be a note-taker for disabled students on campus, which provided a small stipend. My first semester at Harvard was a brutal adjustment. I was taking a full pre-med course load while working 25 to 30 hours a week across my various jobs. I lived in the cheapest housing option available, shared with 3 other students who were also on financial aid. My routine became a relentless cycle of classes, studying, working, and catching sleep whenever possible. Social life was a luxury I couldn't afford, both literally and figuratively. Despite everything, I maintained excellent grades. The rigor of my classes was a welcome distraction from the pain of my family situation. I threw myself into my studies with single-minded focus, determined to prove to myself, if no one else, that I was worthy of this opportunity. It was during my second semester that I met Professor Thomas, a cardiologist who taught an introductory medical sciences course. After class one day, he asked me to stay behind. "Mr. Wilson," he said, using my last name as was his custom with all students, "your work is exceptional, but you look exhausted. Is everything all right?" Something about his genuine concern cracked the carefully maintained composure I had been holding on to. Before I knew it, I was telling him everything. My parents' refusal to help, my 3 jobs, my mounting debt, and my fear that despite all my efforts, I might not make it through. Professor Thomas listened quietly, his face growing increasingly concerned. When I finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "I see a lot of myself in you," he said finally. "I also put myself through medical school with no family support. It's a difficult road, but not an impossible one." He offered me a position as his research assistant, which paid better than my current lab job and provided invaluable experience in my field. More importantly, he became a mentor and father figure when I desperately needed one. He invited me to dinner with his family monthly, checked in on my well-being regularly, and provided guidance not just on academics, but on navigating life's challenges. With Professor Thomas's support and my own determination, I settled into a sustainable, if difficult, rhythm. I still called home occasionally during that first year, brief, strained conversations where neither side mentioned money or the rift that had formed. My parents would ask about classes. I would inquire about Heather, and we would end the call with hollow promises to talk again soon. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving or Christmas that first year, claiming I needed to work. It was true, but it was also easier than facing the people who had made it clear where I stood in their priorities. Instead, I spent holidays with Professor Thomas's family, or with the few friends I had managed to make despite my packed schedule. By the end of my freshman year, I had proven to myself that I could do this. It wouldn't be easy, and the debt was accumulating at an alarming rate, but I was surviving and even thriving academically. I had made it through the worst of the adjustment and was finding my way. What I didn't realize was that an even greater test of my resolve was yet to come. The summer after my freshman year, I decided to go home for a brief visit. Despite everything, I missed my sister and wanted to maintain some connection with my family. It also happened to coincide with Heather's 18th birthday, a milestone I didn't want to miss despite our strained family dynamics. I had saved enough from my campus jobs to buy Heather a silver charm bracelet, nothing extravagant but thoughtful enough to show I cared. I arrived the day before her birthday, greeted with awkward hugs and superficial conversation about school and work. No one mentioned my financial struggles, or the elephant in the room, their decision not to support my education. The next morning, I was awakened by excited squeals from downstairs. I threw on some clothes and headed down to find Heather jumping up and down in the driveway while my parents stood beaming beside her. Parked in front of our house was a brand new white Mercedes convertible with a massive red bow on the hood. Time seemed to slow as I stood frozen on the front steps, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. A Mercedes. Brand new. The kind of car that cost upwards of $55,000. More than a year's tuition at Harvard. More than what I would earn working all 3 of my jobs for 2 years straight. "Do you love it?" My mother was asking Heather, who was now sitting in the driver's seat, running her hands over the leather interior. "It's perfect! Oh my God, I can't believe it's mine," Heather squealed, honking the horn playfully. My father noticed me standing there and had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "Morning, Cassidy. Come see your sister's birthday present. She needed a reliable car for college." I walked down the steps slowly, feeling as though I were moving through molasses. A reliable car for college. I thought of the rusted 15-year-old Honda I had bought for $1,200 with my savings from high school jobs, the car that frequently broke down and cost me hundreds in repairs I could barely afford. Wow, was all I could manage to say. That's some car. Heather seemed oblivious to the tension, excitedly showing me features of the Mercedes. It has heated seats and a premium sound system, and look, the navigation screen is huge. I nodded mechanically, fighting to keep my expression neutral. This wasn't her fault, I reminded myself. This was our parents' doing. Later that day, relatives and Heather's friends arrived for her birthday party. It was an elaborate affair with catered food, a professional photographer, and even a hired DJ in our backyard. As I helped set up tables, I overheard my mother on the phone with the caterer, casually approving an additional $500 for an upgraded dessert selection. During dinner, my father stood up to make a toast to Heather. Today we celebrate our beautiful daughter turning 18 and preparing for her next adventure. We're so proud of you, sweetheart, and want you to know that we'll always support you. We've already set aside funds for your tuition at Brentwood University, so you can focus on enjoying the college experience without financial worries. I nearly choked on my drink. Brentwood University was a private college known more for its social scene than its academics, with annual costs exceeding $40,000. And they were paying for it in full. I excused myself from the table and walked to the quiet of the front yard, trying to process what I'd just heard. After a few minutes, my father came out to find me. "You seem upset," he said, his tone suggesting I was being unreasonable. "Upset?" I laughed without humor. "Dad, you just gave Heather a $55,000 car and promised to pay her full tuition at a private college. Meanwhile, I'm working 3 jobs and taking on massive debt for a degree you refuse to help with. What exactly did you expect me to feel?" He sighed as if I were being childish. "It's different with your sister. She needs these things to fit in and build connections. You're more academically inclined, you'll be fine regardless. So because I work hard and have ambition, I deserve less support? How does that make any sense?" My voice was rising now, years of pent-up hurt boiling over. "Keep your voice down," he hissed, glancing back at the house. "We're celebrating your sister's birthday. Don't ruin it with your jealousy." "Jealousy? This isn't about jealousy, Dad. This is about fairness and honesty. If you had told me from the start that you weren't going to help with college, I could have planned differently. Instead, you let me believe you would help until the last minute, then pulled the rug out from under me." Our heated discussion drew my mother outside. "What's going on out here?" she demanded. "People can hear you." I turned to her, past caring about keeping up appearances. "Mom, how can you justify spending thousands on Heather's car and education when you wouldn't give me a cent for Harvard?" Her face hardened. "You should be grateful for what we've given you. A roof over your head, food, clothes. Many children don't even have that. Grateful? For doing the basic legal requirements of parenthood?" I was incredulous. "I'm your child too. Why does she deserve all the support while I get nothing?" "Because she needs it more," my mother snapped. "Not everyone is blessed with your intelligence and drive. Heather needs extra help to succeed in life." "So I'm being punished for being ambitious and hardworking?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. "Do you have any idea how much I'm struggling? How much debt I'm taking on? How little sleep I get trying to balance work and classes?" My father stepped between us, his voice low and angry. "Enough. You're being selfish and dramatic. We've made our decisions about family finances, and we don't owe you explanations. If you can't be happy for your sister, maybe you shouldn't have come home." Those words hung in the air between us. In that moment, something fundamental broke inside me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about value, worth, love. They had made a clear statement about who mattered more in this family, and it wasn't me. I walked back into the house and up to my old room, packed my few belongings, and wrote a short note to Heather, apologizing for missing the rest of her party and leaving her gift on my bed. Then I walked out the front door without saying goodbye to anyone. As I drove away in my beat-up Honda, watching my childhood home recede in the rearview mirror, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I was done hoping for their approval, their support, their love. From now on, I would build my life on my own terms, with people who valued me for who I was. I didn't know then how long it would be before I spoke to my parents again. I didn't know the struggles and triumphs that awaited me. But driving away that day, despite the pain and anger coursing through me, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. The freedom that comes from finally accepting a painful truth and choosing to move forward anyway. After that fateful day at Heather's birthday party, I returned to Cambridge with a renewed sense of purpose. The pain of my family's rejection was still raw, but it had hardened into a kind of resolve. If my own parents didn't believe in me enough to invest in my future, I would prove my worth through sheer determination. The next 3 years of undergraduate studies were among the most challenging of my life. I maintained my 3 jobs: research assistant for Professor Thomas during weekdays, note-taker for disabled students between classes, and weekend shifts at a 24-hour pharmacy that had replaced my grocery store position. My typical day started at 5 in the morning and ended well after midnight, with every minute carefully allocated between classes, work, studying, and the bare minimum of sleep. There were moments of crushing doubt and exhaustion. I remember one particularly brutal week during my junior year, when I had 3 major exams, a research deadline for Professor Thomas, and picked up extra shifts at the pharmacy because one of my coworkers had quit. I had slept perhaps 10 hours total over 5 days, subsisting on caffeine and vending machine snacks. After finishing my last exam, I stumbled back to my shared apartment and collapsed in tears, wondering if I could really make it through another 1.5 years of this, let alone medical school afterward. It was my roommate Sarah who found me in that state. She was studying nursing and understood the pressure of medical education better than most. Without saying a word, she sat beside me on my bed and put her arm around my shoulders, letting me release months of pent-up stress and exhaustion. "You know you're not alone in this, right?" she said when my tears had subsided. "Michael and I, we're your family now, and families help each other." Sarah and Michael had become my closest friends and support system. Michael was a pharmacy student who often shared his textbooks with me to save money and would leave homemade meals in the refrigerator with notes that said, "Cassidy, eat this or face my wrath." Sarah was the emotional anchor of our little group, the one who insisted on weekly movie nights for our mental health, and who somehow always knew when one of us was at breaking point. That night, Sarah and Michael orchestrated what they called an intervention. They ordered pizza, banned all textbooks from the living room, and forced me to watch comedies with them until I fell asleep on the couch. The next morning, they presented me with a color-coded schedule they had created, identifying places where I could delegate research tasks to undergraduate assistants and swap some pharmacy hours to less demanding times. "You're going to burn out, and then where will you be?" Michael said bluntly. "Let us help you figure this out. You don't have to do everything alone just because your parents are trash humans." With their help, I restructured my commitments to create a slightly more sustainable schedule. It was still grueling, but just manageable enough to prevent complete collapse. Professor Thomas also stepped in, increasing my research stipend and adjusting deadlines to accommodate my exam schedule. "The medical field needs doctors who understand struggle," he told me during one of our weekly meetings. "It makes for more empathetic physicians. But we don't need martyrs who burn themselves out before they even get their white coats." Academically, despite the odds, I was thriving. I maintained a 3.9 GPA in my pre-med courses, published 2 research papers with Professor Thomas, and scored in the 98th percentile on my MCAT. When it came time to apply to medical schools, Professor Thomas wrote me a glowing recommendation letter and personally called colleagues at several top programs. I was accepted to 5 medical schools, including Harvard Medical School. The acceptance should have been a moment of pure joy, but it came with a sobering reality check about finances. Even with scholarships and grants, medical school would add significantly to my already substantial undergraduate debt. I calculated that by the time I finished my medical education, I would owe approximately $300,000 in student loans. Occasionally during those undergraduate years, I would see updates about Heather on social media. She had indeed gone to Brentwood University, but appeared to be spending more time at parties than in class. Midway through her sophomore year, her posts suggested she had dropped out. There were photos of her at beaches, clubs, always with different groups of friends, always smiling. I tried not to let it bother me, but sometimes late at night, exhausted from studying and working, I would find myself staring at these images of her carefree life and feel a complex mixture of emotions: resentment, sadness, and a strange kind of pity. I didn't speak to my parents during this time. On holidays, I stayed in Cambridge, usually spending them with Professor Thomas's family or with Sarah and Michael. They had both met my parents exactly once, when they came to help me move into our shared apartment junior year. The interaction had been brief and strained, with my parents clearly uncomfortable with my living situation and friends. After they left, Sarah had looked at me seriously and said, "I get it now. Everything you told us about them. I totally get it." Medical school was, if possible, even more demanding than undergrad. The volume of information we were expected to absorb was staggering, and the stakes felt immeasurably higher. But I had developed systems and resilience during my undergraduate years that served me well. I continued working as a research assistant for Professor Thomas, who had become not just a mentor, but a father figure to me. I also secured a position as a teaching assistant for first-year medical students, which provided additional income and solidified my own understanding of the material. The grueling schedule of medical school actually had one unexpected benefit. It left little time for dwelling on family issues. I was so consumed with learning every bone, muscle, nerve, and cellular process in the human body that days would pass without my thoughts turning to my parents or Heather. It was, in its own way, a kind of healing. By the time I reached my clinical rotations in the third year of medical school, I had discovered a passion for cardiology. The complexity of the cardiovascular system and the immediate, life-saving nature of the specialty appealed to me. Professor Thomas, himself a cardiologist, was delighted and began including me in more specialized research and introducing me to colleagues in the field. My final year of medical school brought applications for residency programs. With my academic record, research experience, and Professor Thomas's connections, I secured a residency in cardiology at Massachusetts General Hospital, one of the most prestigious programs in the country. The day I received the acceptance call, I sat alone in my apartment for a long time, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. Despite everything, despite the lack of support and the crushing debt and the years of exhaustion, I had done it. I was becoming a doctor on my own terms. Graduation day arrived with a bittersweet quality. Sarah and Michael were there, cheering loudly as I walked across the stage to receive my medical degree. Professor Thomas and his wife sat in the audience, beaming with a pride that should have belonged to my parents. I had not invited my family, and they had not reached out. As I moved the tassel on my cap from one side to the other, officially becoming Dr. Cassidy Wilson, I felt a chapter of my life closing definitively. The struggling student was now a physician, and ahead lay a new set of challenges and opportunities. My residency years were intense but fulfilling. The hours were brutal, often exceeding 80 per week, with overnight shifts and endless cases to manage. But unlike my undergraduate and medical school years, I no longer had to balance multiple jobs. For the first time, I could focus entirely on becoming the best doctor possible. My residence salary wasn't much, but it was enough to cover my basic living expenses, though not enough to make significant payments on my student loans beyond the minimum required. I found myself drawn to interventional cardiology, the subspecialty that deals with catheter-based treatment of heart diseases. There was something deeply satisfying about the immediate results of these procedures, about literally saving lives with my hands and knowledge. My mentors noted my skill and dedication, and I began to build a reputation as a promising young cardiologist. By the time I completed my residency and fellowship at age 30, I had offers from several prestigious hospitals. I chose Boston Memorial Hospital, partly for its excellent cardiology department, and partly because it kept me close to the support network I had built. Sarah was now a nurse practitioner at a nearby hospital, married to Michael, who had become a clinical pharmacist. They had a 2-year-old son who called me Uncle Cassidy, and would squeal with delight whenever I visited. With my new attending physician salary, I finally began making real progress on my student loans. I lived modestly, choosing a small but comfortable apartment rather than an expensive condo. I drove a practical car, ate at home most nights, and put every extra dollar toward debt repayment. Financial freedom became my obsession, second only to my medical career. It was at a hospital fundraiser that I met Elizabeth. She was a healthcare attorney representing the hospital in a complicated case involving medical device patents. We were seated at the same table, and fell into conversation about the intersection of medicine and law. She was brilliant, direct, and had a dry wit that made me laugh for the first time in what felt like years. Our relationship developed slowly. Both of us were career-focused, with demanding schedules and little patience for traditional dating rituals. We would meet for coffee between my surgeries and her court appearances, have late dinners after long days at work, and occasionally spend entire Sundays doing nothing but reading in comfortable silence in her apartment or mine. Elizabeth came from a close-knit family in Maine, and the first time she invited me to join them for a holiday dinner, I was terrified. I had become so accustomed to distance from family that I wasn't sure how to behave in a healthy family dynamic. Her parents were warm and welcoming. Her siblings teased her mercilessly, but with obvious affection, and the whole experience left me with a complex mix of emotions: joy at being included, sadness for what I had missed growing up, and a strange sense of healing as I witnessed what family could and should be. "They liked you," Elizabeth said on the drive back to Boston. "Dad doesn't offer his special whiskey to just anyone." "They're incredible," I replied honestly. "You're lucky to have them." She reached over and took my hand. "I know. And now you have them too." It was a simple statement, but it nearly brought me to tears. The idea that I could be absorbed into this loving family circle felt like a gift I hadn't earned and wasn't sure I knew how to accept. My career continued to flourish. I published research papers, spoke at conferences, and developed a particular expertise in treating complex coronary artery disease. At 31, I was appointed as the Associate Director of Interventional Cardiology at Boston Memorial, one of the youngest physicians to hold such a position. The promotion came with a significant salary increase, allowing me to finally pay off the last of my student loans. The day I made the final payment, I sat staring at the screen for several minutes, watching my account balance show zero for the first time since I was 18. 13 years of debt, gone. I had done it entirely on my own, without a cent of family support. The pride I felt was immeasurable. With my debts cleared, I bought my first home, a modest but charming townhouse in Cambridge, not far from where I had struggled through my college years. As I signed the mortgage papers, I thought about the journey from scared, rejected 18-year-old to homeowner and successful cardiologist. The path had been harder than it needed to be, but perhaps that was what made this moment so sweet. Elizabeth moved in with me 6 months later, and our life together fell into a comfortable rhythm. She understood the demands of my profession, just as I respected the intensity of her legal career. We supported each other's ambitions without competition or resentment, creating a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine admiration. Outside of work and my relationship with Elizabeth, I found fulfillment in mentoring young medical students, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds or without family support. I volunteered at a free clinic once a month, providing cardiac care to patients without insurance. I even established a small scholarship fund at Harvard Medical School specifically for students who were putting themselves through school without family financial support. Sarah and Michael remained central figures in my life. Their son Noah was now 4, and they had welcomed a daughter, Emma. Sunday dinners at their house became a tradition, a time when we could all relax and enjoy each other's company without the pressures of our demanding careers. Watching them parent with such love and intention sometimes made me reflect on my own upbringing, on the stark differences between their parenting and what I had experienced. "You know," Sarah said to me once, after the children were in bed and we were sharing a bottle of wine, "you're going to be an amazing father someday." "How can you be so sure?" I asked, genuinely curious. "It's not like I had great role models." "Exactly because of that," she said firmly. "You know exactly what not to do. And I've seen you with our kids. You pay attention, you listen, you respect them as people. That's what makes a good parent." Her words stayed with me, challenging the fear I had carried that somehow my parents' failures would be replicated in me if I ever had children of my own. Perhaps the very awareness of what had hurt me would ensure I never inflicted those same wounds on others. Throughout these years of building my career and new life, I had maintained zero contact with my parents. I had heard through distant relatives that they were still in the same house, that my father had been promoted to a higher position at his company, that they took regular vacations to Florida. I knew that Heather had moved back home after dropping out of college and had cycled through several jobs without finding a career. None of this information brought me any satisfaction or sense of vindication. I had long since moved past hoping for their approval or justice for their unequal treatment. Or so I thought, until the day my phone rang with an unfamiliar number, and I heard my father's voice for the first time in a decade. It was a Tuesday evening in October when my phone rang. Elizabeth and I were preparing dinner together in our kitchen, something we did whenever our schedules aligned. I glanced at the screen, not recognizing the number, but answering anyway in case it was related to a patient. "Dr. Wilson speaking," I said, phone tucked between my ear and shoulder as I continued chopping vegetables. There was a pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in 10 years but would recognize anywhere. "Cassidy? It's Dad." The knife stilled in my hand. Elizabeth noticed my sudden tension and looked at me questioningly. I mouthed my father to her, and her eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Hello," I said finally, my voice carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." Another pause. "Yes, well, it's been a while. How are you?" The banality of the question after a decade of silence was almost comical. "I'm fine. Is there something you needed?" I could hear him clear his throat, a nervous habit I remembered from childhood. "Actually, there is. We have a situation here, and I was hoping we could talk. As family." The word family coming from him felt hollow, almost offensive. "Go ahead," I said, setting down the knife and moving to the living room for privacy, though I had no intention of hiding this conversation from Elizabeth. "Well, things have been difficult lately," he began. "Been trying to find something comparable, but at my age, it's not easy." I said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "Your mother's had some health issues too. Nothing life-threatening, but she needed surgery last spring for her gallbladder, and our insurance didn't cover everything. Between the medical bills and my unemployment, our savings have taken a hit." I still remained silent, unsure where this was heading, but feeling a growing sense of disbelief. He sighed heavily. "And now, Heather is engaged. Nice fellow, comes from a good family. Jason Barnes, his father owns that chain of car dealerships across New England. They're planning a wedding for next summer. And, well, you know these things can be expensive." I almost laughed. Of course this wasn't a reconciliation attempt. They needed something from me. "Congratulations to Heather," I said flatly. "I'm sorry to hear about Mom's health issues and your job situation, but I'm not sure why you're telling me this after 10 years of no contact." "Cassidy," my father said, his voice taking on a wheedling quality I had never heard before. "You're doing well for yourself. We've heard about your position at Boston Memorial. Dr. Wilson, Associate Director of Cardiology. We're proud of what you've accomplished." The hollow praise made my stomach turn. "Again, why are you calling me now?" "We need help with Heather's wedding," he said finally, abandoning pretense. "The Barnes family is expecting something, well, substantial. We can't afford to look like we can't provide properly for our daughter. It would be humiliating." I sat down heavily on our couch, genuinely stunned. "You're calling me after 10 years to ask for money? For a wedding?" "Not just any wedding," my father said quickly. "This is Heather's future. The Barnes family is very well connected. This marriage could secure her entire life. We need about $75,000 to cover our portion of the expenses." I know it sounds like a lot, but for someone in your position— "My position?" I repeated slowly. "My position as someone who put himself through college and medical school without a cent of help from his parents? That position? Now, Cassidy, we've been over this. We made the decisions we thought were best at the time. And look how well you turned out. You didn't need our help after all." The audacity was breathtaking. Not a word of apology, not a hint of recognition for the unnecessary hardship they had put me through. Just a convenient rewriting of history to cast their abandonment as somehow beneficial to my development. "Have you tried asking Heather to scale back her plans?" I asked. "Or suggested she and her fiancé pay for their own wedding?" My father sounded genuinely shocked at the suggestion. "We couldn't possibly do that. Heather has her heart set on this wedding, and the Barnes family would think well, they might reconsider the match." "I see," I said quietly. "So this is still about appearances, about what other people think of you. It's about family, Cassidy, about helping each other. Heather is your sister. Don't you want her to be happy?" I thought about Heather then, about the sweet little girl who had sometimes sneaked into my room to show me her treasures, who had once told me I was the one who would do something important. I felt no animosity toward her, But I also recognized the pattern playing out again, the expectation that I would sacrifice while she received. Did it ever occur to you, I asked slowly, that I might have wanted to be happy too? That having parents who supported my education might have made my path a little less brutal? That's ancient history, my father dismissed. We're talking about now, about your sister's future. I sat in silence for a long moment, contemplating the absolute lack of self-awareness or remorse in his voice. 10 years had passed, and nothing had changed. They still saw me as a resource to be tapped, not a son to be loved. And then, to my own surprise, I laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh or an angry one. It was the laugh of someone who had finally, completely let go of a burden they had carried too long. I was free of the need for their approval, their love, their understanding. I had built a life filled with people who valued me, who supported me without conditions, who loved me for exactly who I was. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it, though not in the way he would interpret. I won't be helping with Heather's wedding. I wish you all the best. Cassidy, wait, my father started, his voice rising in alarm. You don't understand how important this is. We're talking about your sister's future, about our family's reputation. Goodbye, Dad, I said calmly, and ended the call. Elizabeth had been watching from the kitchen doorway. She came and sat beside me, taking my hand in hers. Are you okay? I looked at her, this brilliant, kind woman who had chosen to share her life with me. You know what? I really am. For the first time in maybe my whole life, I really am okay. That night, my phone rang repeatedly with calls from both my parents. I didn't answer. They left voicemails ranging from guilt-tripping to angry to pleading. My mother texted that I was breaking Heather's heart, that I had always been selfish, that after everything they had done for me, this was how I repaid them. My father's messages became increasingly desperate, eventually offering to recognize my contribution with a mention in his father of the bride speech. After a day of this, I composed a brief email. I put myself through Harvard and medical school while working multiple jobs and accumulating hundreds of thousands in debt that I only recently paid off. I did this because you chose not to help me, saying I needed to learn independence. I learned that lesson well. Heather is 26. Perhaps it's time she learned it too. Please do not contact me again unless it's to acknowledge and apologize for the disparity in how you treated your children. I never received a response to that email, but the calls and messages stopped. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that Heather and Jason had a small wedding at his parents' beach house rather than the extravaganza originally planned. I sent a card and a modest gift certificate, with a note wishing her happiness. It was the most I could offer, without reopening wounds that had finally begun to heal. 6 months after the unexpected call from my father, Elizabeth and I were having dinner at an Italian restaurant. We both loved when she asked me a question that caught me off guard. Do you ever regret cutting ties with your family? I set down my fork, giving the question the consideration it deserved. No, I said finally. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that they couldn't love me the way I needed to be loved. But I don't regret protecting myself from continued hurt. Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about family a lot lately. About what makes a real family versus just people you're related to by blood. And what conclusions have you reached? I asked, curious about where this conversation was heading. She smiled, reaching across the table to take my hand. That I want to start one with you. A real one, built on mutual respect and unconditional love. It took me a moment to process what she was saying. Are you proposing to me? I asked, a smile spreading across my face. I suppose I am, she laughed. Though, I didn't plan to do it quite like this. But yes, Cassidy Wilson, I want to marry you. I want us to be a family. The kind that supports each other equally and loves without conditions. I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said simply. There's nothing I want more. We were married the following spring in a ceremony that reflected who we were. Intimate, meaningful, and surrounded only by people who truly cared for us. Sarah was my best woman. Michael gave a toast that had everyone alternating between laughter and tears. And Professor Thomas, now retired but still a central figure in my life, walked me down the aisle in the absence of my father. The wedding cost a fraction of what my parents had deemed necessary for Heather's. yet it was perfect in every way that mattered. Elizabeth and I wrote our own vows, promising not just love and fidelity, but also respect, equality, and unwavering support for each other's dreams and growth. Around this time, I was approached by Harvard Medical School about establishing a more formal scholarship program for students without family financial support. The idea resonated deeply with me, and Elizabeth and I decided to commit a significant portion of our income to fund what we called the Self-Reliance Scholarship. Unlike most scholarships that focus solely on academic achievement, this one specifically sought out students who were putting themselves through medical school with little or no family assistance. The first year, we funded 3 scholarships. By the third year, other donors had joined our cause, and we were able to support 10 students annually. I made a point of meeting each recipient personally, sharing my own story, and offering mentorship along with financial aid. These meetings were profoundly healing for me, transforming my painful experiences into something that could help others facing similar challenges. Through mutual friends, I occasionally heard updates about my parents and Heather. My father had eventually found work at a smaller company, though at a significantly reduced salary. My mother's health had stabilized. Heather's marriage to Jason had ended after just 2 years, and she had moved back in with my parents temporarily. Despite everything, I wished them no ill. I had simply accepted that they could not be part of my life in any healthy way. Elizabeth and I welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Grace, 2 years after our wedding. Holding her in my arms for the first time, I made a silent promise that she would always know her worth, that she would never question whether she was loved or valued. We had a son, Benjamin, 2 years later, and I made him the same promise. Parenthood brought its own challenges and joys, but it also provided unexpected healing. Each time I chose to respond to my children with patience rather than frustration, with encouragement rather than criticism, I was breaking the patterns I had experienced. Each time I prioritized their emotional needs alongside their physical ones, I was creating the childhood I wished I had known. Sarah and Michael's children, now teenagers, were like cousins to our kids. Professor Thomas, well into his 70s, but still sharp as ever, became Grandpa Thomas to Grace and Benjamin, a role he embraced with delight. Elizabeth's parents and siblings folded us all into their family gatherings, creating a tapestry of connection that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with genuine care. On the 10th anniversary of my father's phone call, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The pain of my parents' rejection had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I had built a life rich in meaning, purpose, and authentic relationships. I had broken the cycle of conditional love and created something better for the next generation. The greatest irony was that my parents' refusal to support me had indeed taught me self-reliance, but not in the way they had intended. It had taught me that I could survive without their approval, that I could thrive despite their rejection, and ultimately, that I could build a family based on choice rather than blood. If there was a lesson in all of this, it was perhaps that our worth is not determined by how others value us, even those who should love us most. That sometimes the people who should be our strongest supporters become our greatest obstacles. And that's okay, because we can find support elsewhere. That family is not just about shared DNA, but about shared values, mutual respect, and unconditional love. As I tucked my children into bed that night, I realized that the final piece of healing had come quietly, without fanfare. I no longer needed my parents to recognize their mistakes. I no longer needed them to apologize or make amends. I had found peace on my own terms, building a life that honored my worth even when they could not see it. Have you ever had to choose between your own well-being and maintaining a toxic family relationship? How did you handle it? And what did you learn from the experience? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, consider subscribing and sharing it with others who might need to hear that they too can build a beautiful life on their own terms. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that sometimes the family we create is more healing than the one we were born into.